Welcome back to the Cape Copcast. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are the official podcast of the Cape Coral Police Department. I'm Lisa Greenberg. I'm one of the public affairs officers here.
And I'm Mercedes Simons. Together we make up the public affairs team here. We were tasked with a podcast for the police department. And today we're sitting down with Sergeant Dan Costa to talk a little more about fraud, educating people. And that can include a myriad of topics like scams, credit card fraud.
All different types of scams and different types of fraud. Contractor fraud is something big that, of course, the city of Cape Coral dealt with more so after the hurricane and in the months to follow. But still, that's something that we could see here because it is such a booming area. We're seeing a lot of people move here and start construction. We cover it all. I think we cover a lot of the myths too. Like, is it really always just older people who fall for these types of scams and types of fraud cases too?
Right. So hopefully everybody learns a little bit.
Want to go ahead and get into it?
Right. So we're here on the Cape Copcast today. We're talking to Sergeant Dan Costa. He's actually a doctor, but we'll get into that later, about different fraud, ways to educate people in the community. Obviously, you'll talk about it, but you see a lot of different issues in Bitcoin, people giving their life savings for all different kinds of things that could have been completely avoidable. There's just a lot of scams that you might say, hey, that's ridiculous. And then I'm sure there are some that you think, wow, that could be me. That's really believable.
Yeah, absolutely. We see it almost on a daily basis, unfortunately. So I'm a sergeant in our economic crimes unit. I've been with the department for about 15 years now. A little bit about my doctorate. So I went to school to pursue my doctorate because I also work as a part-time professor at a local college. And I've been involved in education for many years now.
Wow.
What's your overall studies in with your doctorate?
So I went to school to be a doctor in education, and I primarily teach. I got a master's in forensics, and went to school for criminal justice as well. So I teach forensics and criminal justice related courses.
Right. So you're probably the perfect person to talk about both education and fraud and educate people about fraud. So that's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. What's kind of your background here with Cape PD?
So like I said, I've been here for about 15 years. I've been assigned to our economic crimes unit now for a couple months. Before that, I was a patrol sergeant on patrol. Did about a year and a half of midnights, and then on the night shift, and then I did about 6 months or so on days. And then prior to that, I was a detective assigned to both our major crimes unit, and then prior to that, our property crimes unit.
Lots of experience.
So what's been kind of the craziest case that you've experienced so far as you've been in the economic crimes unit?
It's quite a few. It's unfortunate because, as we talked about earlier, a lot of people do lose their life savings. And almost on a weekly basis, we see people that get scammed out of their life savings. It's not uncommon for somebody to fall victim to a scam, whether it's what we call a romance scam, or they believe the loved one was arrested or loved one needs help, and unfortunately, without them kind of doing their homework and double checking, they'll very easily send them $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. So it can either be a lot of times we see them send it via Bitcoin. We've seen people go out and buy gold bars and physically mail gold bars out of the country.
Wow.
There's a lot of different weird requests that come in that people believe are legitimate, like you were talking about with loved ones. A lot of times I've seen it, people say, oh, hey, your kid's in jail, they need bail money, but it's not anything that's reputable. And they'll also, from my experience, they'll try to keep you on the phone and say, hey, don't call anybody, don't tell anybody about that. That's a red flag. What are the other red flags that you see that are good to talk about?
So, a good rule of thumb is no legitimate government entity or agency. It's not going to call you and say, hey, you have a warrant. That's what we see a lot. You have a warrant or you missed jury duty. And unless you want to be arrested, you got to pay us, $1,000. That's just not common practice. And what we see a lot of times is they'll have people go to a Walmart or Target and buy 2-3 gift cards. And again, that's going to be part of kind of a red flag in a scam that no legitimate company or government entity is going to ask you to pay and get in a gift card.
I think that a lot of people think that elderly people are typically the ones that fall prey to these kinds of scams, but I'm sure you've seen plenty of cases where people who are younger also are victims of this kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. And, even romance scams, we always assume the elderly, but, we're seeing people in their 40s, and even younger than that. They kind of fall prey to a person who they're going to give all their savings to.
Right.
And it's common.
I don't know if this fits under economic crimes or not, but I've seen it to where people are meeting people online, they're solicited for nude images of themselves, and then they end up trying to extort these people for a lot of money and say, hey, I'll contact your whole family, send them your pictures if you don't send us that money. That's also common. But what can people do what are people supposed to do in those circumstances when they find themselves in that kind of predicament?
Obviously, I would caution people before they send pictures of themselves.
Right.
That can be, just be careful who you send, especially if you don't actually physically ever met the person. That's the big one. A lot of times they never met anybody, and they're sending them their pictures. And a lot of them, they'll tell them some sob story, and they'll fall for it, and then they'll either start sending them money. And, unfortunately, at some point, you willingly gave someone money too. So even though it's kind of a scam, a lot of times it's hard for us to prove that the criminal element there as well. But, again, I would just be careful who you meet online. Make sure you can vet the person, that they're a real person, that you've actually physically met them. And obviously, if you're sending nude photos, I'd be careful who you share those with. Absolutely, because that is a common scam as well.
You mentioned sob story, and it got me thinking too. I think most of these scams, I would guess, involve preying on someone's emotions and like getting to the core of their hearts and trying to appeal to them. And that's where the money comes from. And if it's not that, then it's fear of some kind, right? Fear of going to prison, fear of missing jury duty and dealing with the ramifications of that. So I think, it's important for people to take a step back and not react emotionally in those kinds of situations, right?
Absolutely. Those are the two most common ones. Absolutely. They're either going to try to evoke fear. You're going to go to jail if you don't pay us, or we're going to kill your family, or things of that nature. And a lot of the information they use is accessible by public information. You can find basic Google search. And a lot of people, that will scare them further, but it's just information that's out there, unfortunately. And the next would be a romance scam, which we had a case a couple of weeks ago where, unfortunately, the victim felt that the person she was communicating, never talked to on the phone, just via messenger, was Johnny Depp. So, and he was, hurting for money, and she paid him the money, so she was out over $300,000. It's unfortunate, but, she fell prey, and these individuals are talented in what they do, so.
Right. So when you guys investigate that, where do you start? How do you go through the process of everything? And can you tell us anything about where you finished up on that case?
Yeah, so that case is still active. It depends. It's case-by-case scenario. Unfortunately, depending on the currency that's being exchanged, sometimes it's hard for us to track. Like Bitcoin, that's very difficult for us to. It's trackable to some degree, but obviously those currencies are hard to be able to track in the origin. By the time it gets to where it's going, a lot of times it'll change hands so many times, and it's going to a foreign country, foreign entity that may not even reside in the United States. So again, those cases are difficult. We've had cases where people send multiple gold bars to foreign countries, via the mail. So again, who knows who's going to get those gold bars when they get there? You're not really signing for it. So it's unfortunate for the victims, and if they can just pause before they send money, or maybe talk to a loved one or friend and be like, hey, what do you think about this? I think that'd be very beneficial for them.
I think, too, letting people know that if they do feel like they may be in a situation where they're falling victim to a romance scam or a jury duty scam or anything like that, that they can call our department, too, and ask, is this something that seems like a scam? Or if I miss jury duty, is this what would happen?
Absolutely. And, the other thing that we also have at our agencies, we have a CCPD fraud email that citizens can reach out to us, and you can actually communicate with us one-on-one via email. And if you ever feel like you may potentially be a victim of a fraud or crime, it's a good way to reach out to us. Is that a method of communicating or formally documenting a crime? But at least you can run it by us and say, absolutely, don't send them any money. That sounds like a scam. And then if you feel like we need to further report it, then absolutely we can refer you to our desk officers or our dispatch and have somebody go out to your house.
Yep. If it's an emergency, call 911. But in most cases, if your life's not being threatened, you just have questions, call the non-emergency number. It doesn't mean you'll have to wait forever. There's a pretty quick response to that. And then officers can either contact the fraud unit, or they might have knowledge of what you're dealing with and going through. Because a lot of times when you're on the inside, like you said, it's kind of emotions based. It's important to have somebody from an outside perspective and say, hey, wait, that doesn't quite line up. It doesn't make sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And to be honest, some of these scams can go on for months before you actually start saving money. So you actually feel that you've gotten to know this individual And again, it's primarily via message, via email, text.
And I think something that's important too for people to remember is you kind of mentioned this. A lot of the information that these people use in these scams, especially the fear-based ones, the jury duty ones, or your family member is going to jail and you have to pay this, whatever that type of scam is. But a lot of that information is accessible on an internet search. So also being careful as to what you're posting on social media, what you're sharing online.
I mean, just being a little more careful about what you post on social media, and just overall, just be mindful. If somebody's giving you information, a lot of times if you stop to think and say, hey, you know what, this information is public information, And I think that's also going to help ease a lot of your concerns regarding one of those fear-based scams. And just being careful in general, I think it's important as well. You want to be safe, especially when you post on social media.
Are there any other kind of scams or fraud cases that stand out to you, even if it's things like, paying a contractor who doesn't have a license and now you're stuck out all this money and the work's not done? Is that kind of stuff that you see as well?
Absolutely. So that's probably one of the most common. Unfortunately, people do fall victims to contractor fraud, which is very common. And it was more common during the hurricane. After the hurricane, a lot of people came into the area to help us out or to do work. So one of the things when we talk about contractor fraud is, again, people can lose a lot of money if they don't do their homework. A couple tips is make sure that your contractor is licensed and insured. And you can do that through just a simple check on DPVR, which is the Department of Professional Regulations for Businesses. So if you can just Google that, and then you can search the business, make sure they are a legitimate business within the state of Florida and they're accredited to do the work that they're trying to do. And then also contacting the city permitting, make sure the contract is a legitimate contract that they can, in fact, do work in the city as well. Try to avoid paying for cash. Also, make sure you get a contract, written contract, what they're going to do. And if you pay them by check, that also helps us out because we're going to be able to determine who actually cashed the check, because unfortunately some people do portray themselves to be employees of companies, which they're not. And they do scam people that way as well. But those rule of thumbs is if you make sure it's a legitimate company, they're licensed and insured, and you get a contract, you pay via check or through a Venmo, things like that, a cash app of some sort, that'll really be beneficial for you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. At what point when you realize that you've been a victim of a fraud or scam should you call the police to report it?
So, as soon as you think, even if you don't feel like it may be a scam, even just reporting what we often refer to as like an information fraud, that'll benefit you in the long run because we're documenting that, you may be potentially a victim of a fraud. And the other more common, unfortunately, is identity theft. And that's something that we deal with almost, again, very, very often, very prevalent, unfortunately, in the community. And we actually see people, unfortunately, people go out with stolen identities and buy cars, take out massive loans. And unfortunately, now you're having to jump through all the hoops to prove you didn't buy these cars or you didn't take out this credit cards, things like that. So one of the best things we can recommend people is either get some form of credit monitoring that will tell you if this is occurring, or it doesn't cost you any money to lock your credit. Basically, you can contact the 3 bureaus and put basically like a temporary hold. Unless you're buying something or trying to finance something, that'll really help you out. Then if you need to do that, you can just kind of unlock your credit. It'll keep people from basically pretending to be like you and going to buy a car. Because that's quite often, quite common as well.
Right.
Unfortunately, when you fall victim to identity theft, that's when you would start taking those measures. But sometimes it's better to do that as a preventative measure before you get there. I guess it doesn't cost you any money to put put a lock in your credit, and make sure nobody can use it.
Smart. We talk so much about the evolution of technology, and in some ways it's so wonderful, right? It helps you in solving cases. You can trace things using technology, but it also creates so many new and different and complex ways for people to either be scammed or fall victim to some kind of fraud.
Absolutely. It's like your typical cat and mouse between, law enforcement and criminals. As they evolve, we have to evolve as well. And then technology kind of makes them smarter. And then we're always kind of trying to become better. And, I do feel that we've come a long way. But unfortunately, these scams, there's not a week that'll go by that I won't read like, man, that's a new scam. I can't believe somebody fell victim to that, but they do. And people will lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. It would just blow your mind how easy it is.
What's the biggest amount of money you've seen someone lose recently?
upwards of three to $400,000, and this is just a basic scam. The most common scams that we're seeing currently and multiple a day is you have a warrant, and people will go out and spend. I mean, we just had a lady who went out and paid for $19,000 in gift cards.
Wow. Cape Coral has grown a lot. I'm not saying it's all elderly people, but I think a lot of times, if you're worried about your grandkids, maybe a lot of these people, they don't talk to them every day, so they don't know if Jimmy's in jail or not. And so they're just willing to go out and do whatever it takes to make sure their family's safe without stopping to ask questions. And a lot of times they're told not to ask questions. They're put in fear that if they ask questions, then something will happen to their loved one or, kind of different things like that. It's pretty scary when you're going through it, I'm sure, for these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. Unfortunately, a lot of these criminals will stay on the phone with the victims as they're doing the transactions, and they're almost coaching them through the whole process and making sure that they don't walk away from it. They go through the transactions and stuff like that. So, I mean, it is unfortunate. And since we're talking about gift card, another thing to kind of keep an eye out when you're at Publix, Walmart, Target, whatever, buying gift cards, one of the other things that we often see is criminals will come in and they'll swap gift cards out with basically cards that are already been used or cards that are not going to work. So when you scan your card and activate it, they have the actual code or the actual card that they immediately almost use.
Wow.
So something to keep in mind, especially during the holidays, look at your gift cards, make sure they haven't been opened or tampered with. Because if that's the case, then obviously contact the management of that store so they can either remove them, contact us. But that's something that we've seen. We just had a case not even 2 weeks ago where they went on, they probably went to 2 different Walmarts and they swapped out about 30 to 40 gift cards.
Wow.
At each store.
I haven't even heard of that type of scam yet, so that's actually really interesting.
That is interesting. And you kind of touched on this too, but since we're a police department, I think we can explain to people if they get a call saying that there's a warrant out for their arrest and need to pay a bunch of money. As a police department, if someone does have a warrant out for their arrest, we're not just going to call them up and demand money.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're either going to want to talk to them in person, but again, no legitimate government agency, law enforcement agency. The other recommendation is that we see a lot is, hey, your son got arrested. You need to pay $5,000 to bail him out. And they'll throw the name of a jail in the area, or they got arrested in Tampa. My recommendation is hang up with that person and call the department or the jail personally, and do your own due diligence. If they give you a number, don't call a number they're giving you. Search it on your own, get to your own number, and confirm whether or not your loved one is actually in jail. Because again, they're sending hundreds of dollars, and it's unfortunate.
Is there any kind of fraud that you think people are more likely to fall victim to? Because I feel like a lot of people will listen to this and say, that could never be me, or, oh, I'm too smart for that. That won't happen to me.
It all depends on the victim. But every single victim we talked to, regardless of the scam, they all said, I didn't think this would ever happen to me. And people assume that you're smarter, but, not to judge your intelligence or anything, but, you're dealing with people who their job is to scam people. And that's all they do for a living is to scam people for a living. So they're good at what they do. One of the other scams that we deal with, unfortunately, is computer scams. So those are big as well. So unfortunately, they'll click a link on their computer or something will pop up. And they'll say, hey, you got a virus on your computer. You got to pay us $10,000 to $15,000 to wipe your virus, wipe your computer. And, they'll pay the money. And then the unfortunate part is they'll give people access to their computers. And when you give somebody access to your computer, either your desktop, your laptop, your phone, we keep a lot of private information on our devices. And if you're giving somebody that access, they have access to your bank accounts. You have access to, information of who you are, your social, things like that. That's something we'll see a lot is not only are you out the money, now they got your bank accounts to start transferring money. We just had a case where a guy lost almost $200,000 in Bitcoin. And it looks like he transferred the money himself.
Because they hacked into his computer? They hacked his computer.
So it's so hard at that point. It's hard to trace. They're still traceable. It just makes it difficult for us. And then now you're out the money, and it looks like you might have done it. So it's just careful on the links you press, and if you think you might have been compromised, obviously see a computer professional that can help you out.
I think that's the other thing too, is no one's going to call you and tell you you have a computer virus. That's something that you'll have to take to a technician to be determined. No one's going to just know that
Yep.
So that's something else to keep in mind as well.
None of this is to shame anyone.
Right.
It's just talking about it. It's shedding a little bit more light, sharing more information, just to educate people a little bit, because there are things you've said here that I didn't know before. I have investigative experience on the road, and certain things I've come across, like I've come across somebody who bought a boat on Craigslist, but it was a boat they never saw. They bought it for $40. They were ready to pick it up, and then obviously that day never came. They said they were going to deliver the boat, drop it off, and they never did. And that's something that could obviously be very believable, right? We're in Florida. It's a beautiful area. You want to buy a boat. Oh, somebody's selling a boat. And then, but you have to have those precautions in place, because I think people are often too trusting, and you have to be aware that these things do happen. You think it'll never happen to you, and then you're out $40,000. So just take the precautions, call the department, do your homework, make sure, the boat in this case is actually a legitimate thing, and we'll go from there. And we're always happy as a police department to help you out, but you have to be educated and ask those questions first.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that there's a fraud email for the department that people can contact. What is that email?
Yes, ma'am. That is ccpdfraud@capecoral.gov.
Perfect. So if you ever feel like you are maybe falling victim to some kind of scam or fraud type of case, you can email that as well as call the non-emergency line.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Awesome.
The detectives in our unit, they work very hard, and, they're always go above and beyond for the victims, and, and always trying to successfully resolve cases. So again, if you ever guys have any questions, if you feel like you may be falling victims of a potential fraud, reach out to our email, ccpdfraud@capecoral.gov. And myself or any one of the detectives in the unit, we all get the email. We all respond back to everyone within, 24 to 48 hours. You can ask those questions, and we can hopefully keep you from falling prey to scam.
Awesome. Hardworking group of men and women for sure.
Yeah, and they're kind of the ones, they make a lot of different investigative arrests, but you don't see it on the news necessarily, because it's not the exciting crime where somebody was chased down and put in handcuffs. It's the stuff that is actually very common, becoming more prevalent day in and day out, that you guys are seeing. So we're thankful for you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the Cape Copcast. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for listening to the Cape Copcast, where we dive into the heart of the Cape Coral Police Department safety initiatives, community relations, and the insightful stories of different officers that make up our department.
Please like and share our podcast. If you have feedback, you can email capepdpao@capecoral.gov. And remember to follow us on social media. Our handle is @CapePD on all major platforms. Stay safe, stay Cape.